It's no secret that the AI space is absolutely booming right now, but unfortunately, so is a number of people that are talking out of their ass about it. You've seen them, course creators that have never actually closed a real client, and gurus that are preaching frameworks, and these same people couldn't even build an end-to-end scenario if their life depended on it. So what I'm doing here is a little bit different. I'm starting a top-rated podcast, but I'll only be talking to guests that have publicly verifiable results. I'm talking about real Upwork profiles, real client solutions, and real client projects that you can actually look at. My name's Adam. I'm the founder at APG Software, and I also started as a top-rated and expert-vetted freelancer on Upwork that did over 60 projects and earned over $100,000 on the platform, and that's all publicly verifiable. You can literally go to my profile and see it for yourself. Today, I'm talking with Frank Gonzalez, also top-rated plus on Upwork, and he's done it in under 10 months. His first job was $600 or 3 separate $200 milestones, and now he's closing projects that are publicly viewable on Upwork for over $15,000. Today, we're going to unpack that entire journey and talk through everything, starting from his current profile and where he is today. Then we're going to go back and take a look at how he actually got there, and then we're going to talk over some of the key things that will help you in your own journey around sales, closing deals, and how to actually hook big clients. On top of that, we'll also scope out the future of the space and where he sees opportunity for people to get into AI now and in 2026. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Cool. All right. G'day, Frank. It's good to finally book you in and get this conversation on the road. And you're also the first person that I'm talking to in this series where we're talking to people who have started on Upwork and have seen significant success specifically in the AI space on Upwork. So I'm looking forward to kind of going in and taking a look at the slides and the presentation that you've built here to kind of walk us through your existing Upwork profile and then go back a little bit and start to talk about how you got started and also some of the things about how you sell yourself, what kind of things you're actually selling. And then we'll get into talking a little bit more about the future of AI and where you think it would be good for someone who's trying to get started in this space to jump in 2026 and beyond.
Sounds good, man. Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be a part of the group in school and want to share with you guys as much as I can. Quick intro and then stop me whenever you want to interject or kind of get some more detail. But my name is Frank Gonzalez. I run Clean Cut Systems. I've been running it for the year of 2025. As it currently looks, this is the website here on the bottom left and the right-hand side. And then my Upwork profile is kind of where it all started. This has been going through a bunch of iterations, like specifically the title and then even the bio underneath it. And then as I'm getting different clients, I'm kind of adding to it, seeing what the market wants, and then just making those changes. So this has been a work in progress. And I even showed you like my old website, how it was not this good at all. It's just something to have. Sometimes I pitch it in the loom, sometimes I don't. But that being said, getting into like what I've actually done, it's kind of two main things. One is going to be automation with Make primarily, but I can use N8N or Zapier if the client demands it. And then also custom software solutions. So for some examples on the right-hand side here, you see some stuff that's connecting, calendars, CRMs, project managers, LLMs, communication tools, etc. And on the left-hand side, you have some like full-blown SaaSes, some 1 to 2 page portals, and then even like interactive calendars or lead magnets and things like that.
Cool. And just on those apps, I can see you're using make.com and Zapier you mentioned. If for those SaaS apps that you're building now, what tools are you typically building those apps on?
So it started off with Bolt and Lovable, and then I started to lean towards Bolt specifically because of that hackathon. So I just thought there's some kind of gas behind it. And then I did all that. But then in the middle of a client project, actually, I realized that I needed some bigger muscle. So I moved into Cursor. And with that, it's like Bolt in the same way where you're prompting it, you're doing all these different commands, but it's just a lot more precise where you can specifically like call out code and sections of code and things like that. And then it just has, it seems like more intelligence when it comes to making changes in code.
Yeah, cool. And in terms of the Upwork profile, I know we're just about to talk about how you got started, but yeah, I can see your top rated plus, which is awesome. How long have you been on Upwork, and how long did it take you to get to that stage where you've achieved the top rated plus status on Upwork?
Yeah. So I started to look around kind of Q4 last year and then started to like slowly but surely apply. And eventually I got my first job with that in about January, I think. And in there, it was kind of in the beginning, this kind of pulls me into the next slide anyways, but in the beginning, it was like very low level stuff. Just wanted to get some momentum, just wanted to get some stuff going. So my first Upwork job was $600 for 3 automations, $200 in automation. And these were like pretty clear cut and pretty easy in that regard. So whereas like a project manager to an email notification or something like that. So that was kind of like the first gig. But then, along the way, it was really just about taking on jobs that were just like 10 to 30% outside my comfort zone and kind of learning and growing from there. And eventually, as you see, we got those bigger, multiple $1,000 jobs on Upwork.
I'm super. So I really want to zone in on exactly how you started, because I think that's like, so $600 for your first job is awesome. I like how you talk about like the 30% outside your comfort zone, because at the end of the day, no one's an expert when they first start. So you've got to get in there, and I kind of look at it as paid learning. So if you can do something that you're 70% comfortable with, and then use that like paid experience to go and research and figure out the next 30%, that's how you can grow whilst getting paid at the same time. Also, the fact that you did this like in less than 10 months or so is pretty crazy. Do you remember how that first Upwork job, like how you actually won that? Was that an American-based client, or do you remember exactly where that client was? And also, how long, like you said, $200 in automation. If you can remember, how long do you think hour-wise it took to deliver that entire project, including client meetings and kind of everything involved in delivering that?
Yeah, so I still remember that client, and she actually comes back to me occasionally for maintenance and stuff. She was a real estate agent based in the United States on the East Coast, and it was a post about Monday specifically. It's a project management software, and it's kind of runs the same to a CRM, or if you've ever used Airtable or Upwork or anything, or not Upwork, ClickUp, anything like that, then they all kind of function the same way. And so wasn't 1,000% confident with it, but enough so to where I kind of made my pitch. We hopped on a call, talked about what she needed to have done, and then I started to kind of use Claude basically to kind of pick apart all the pieces that I needed to. So I was copying and pasting a lot, looking up YouTube videos about Make, learning JSON kind of on the job. And then as I did that, I figured out some basic stuff like connecting, one thing to another. And then from there, I was just, doing what I needed to do, I think professionally, like communicating with her how things were getting done and like in kind of step by steps, so that she felt that there was progress being made as I was learning the next thing. And as far as like what went into it, it was probably maybe 10 to 15 hours on either directly working with Make or, troubleshooting with Claude, or in some form or another having a conversation or communication with her.
Yeah, cool. And did you have any like experience? Because I think I remember you mentioned, did you have any experience with like Make.com and Zapier prior to kind of turning to Upwork, or is this the first time that you'd use these kind of automation tools to do something like this?
No, the most experience I had was like internal workflows. So if you have CRMs or anything like that, sometimes there's things you can do that, like if one pipeline stage gets reached, it triggers an action on tagging or adding them to a sequence or something like that. So any kind of like automation within specific softwares, I was starting to get comfortable with that. But it was really just like late last year where I started to specifically sign up for Make and then make little scenarios in my own kind of workflows, in my own software stack. And then slowly but surely I started to expand into others. But that was like the first time where I was doing it for someone and where I had to kind of make sure that, I knew what I was talking about to some extent.
Yeah, nice. And in terms, so I want to then talk about like the transition to bigger jobs, and in terms of in confidence growth, how do you like back then, did you feel like you had a little bit of imposter syndrome when you're getting on those first sales calls to do something for yourself for the first time? Would you say that you felt confident because you had a bit of experience in business process automation before? Like how would you pitch your, I guess, confidence growth jumping on sales calls and handling projects today in comparison to what that looks like back then on the first job or so?
Yeah. So I knew I could sell, right? I was just coming out of a year of doing high ticket sales. And so I knew that I could sell. But the thing with high ticket sales is that you're never really doing the fulfillment. You're never really responsible for that stuff. And so you just kind of sell them, collect the cash, and then pass them off. And so the biggest gap in confidence was definitely like the fulfillment, because I don't have any coding background. I've played around with like Python. I played around with a couple things just to understand what code was, but never to the extent of like building something. And so this was, real businesses running real operations day to day. And if something failed, it was on me. So it was definitely like nerve wracking in that sense whenever I would just hop on the call and I knew that I could sell, but sometimes I just was worried that my mouth was too big for my actions. And so I just kind of pushed through it and then just, kind of put in the hours. I was just willing to stay up late or wake up early or kind of ask for more time if I really needed to in some cases. But, it's just about continuing to pitch, like I said, that 30% outside my comfort zone, which is how I've learned everything, really, even high ticket sales itself. But once I kind of got comfortable with knowing that everything was learnable through copying and pasting or just using YouTube as like your search engine, there's templates out there from a lot of people. And even if there's not a template, there's at least, half a template out there that you can kind of tweak for your case. Once I realized that everything was kind of figure outable if you're just resourceful enough, then it started to kind of level out where I wasn't so nervous about, being able to pitch, but not being able to fulfill. They kind of like started to match. And that's where it really started to smooth out from there.
Yeah, nice, cool. And how, like, probably how much do you use? I know we talked about like 30% out of the comfort zone, but in terms of key areas that you will go for help when you're delivering something that you haven't done before, what are your top channels for? Like, how heavily do you rely on ChatGPT? Do you use like YouTube tutorials? Like, what are your top sources of troubleshooting when you do hit something that you're not 100% comfortable with?
Yeah, first and foremost is Claude. I'm a big Claude guy. That's like my personal assistant day to day, in business, out of business, personal life, business stuff. And I just literally am talking to that thing like, 5 times a day at least minimum. And so when it comes to business stuff, I was like taking screenshots and copying and pasting it, or looking within the actual JSON code and copying and pasting it and asking it to troubleshoot. And, sometimes it's like you're just having a conversation with a colleague where it doesn't even know, and you're kind of giving each other information back and forth, but eventually it gets there. And then, if you're lucky, there is a YouTube on like that specific problem. There's a YouTube video on that specific issue or that specific template, but it's not always the case. So it's kind of like a mixture between YouTube and Claude. And then even within like Bolt or Cursor, there is the ask capability where you can kind of turn off the code, but just ask it about the code. That has been useful. It's not my number one go-to because it does kind of clunk up the context, but it can be useful in kind of some minor cases. But Claude 1,000% has been like a game changer for me in all aspects.
Yeah, cool. Okay, and then now to talk about like the biggest Upwork job. What does that look like? Or what delivery? What was the kind of body of work that if for your biggest job, and what did that look like in terms of sales process, delivery, and how much harder was it, I guess, than the first Upwork job?
This one was a case of just like being in the right place, right time. I think I originally had this proposal in front of me on Upwork where the guy needed a CRM setup. So he had Close, which is a CRM software, which I was very familiar with from my time in sales. And he just needed that set up for like pipelines and a couple different stages and some internal automations in there. And it was an initial project for $1,200, and it was settled over text even. I think even before we got on a sales call, we just did that. And I thought to myself, like, all right, this is simple. I've done it before. It's going to be, one and done, move on to the next one, collect a review. But we hopped on, we did that. I delivered it. And then he was like, hey, man, I see your profile. You might have like this other thing that I want. What do you think? And I said, yeah, sure. And we did that for like a few more things. And eventually it got to a place where he asked for a series of automations where someone would kind of fill out a form and then receive an email. And he dropped like a subtle line where he was like, I've been hearing something about interfaces, or it'd be cool if they could be like an ecosystem. And that's where I really started to also was using Bolt and learn about Bolt more. And then that's like what kind of clicked for me. I connected the dots that what he was looking for was like an automated workflow, an automated set of actions for one of his users, but he was really looking for like a custom SaaS platform in a way. And so I built a small MVP through Bolt, showed him, how do you feel about this instead of make scenarios? He said, absolutely, let's do this. What's the price? What's the deadline? And then we just went off. So the biggest Upwork job is that platform. But as far as like customer lifetime value, it's actually double with that guy because of other projects that we've done. And so this is where I'm always like telling people, like, don't just discount something because it seems like lower on the terms of like how much you're going to get, or as far as like your full capabilities. Like, I had no idea in that first impression that this guy was going to end up being a whale as he is. And we have a great relationship. He's just been super, like willing to let me kind of lead the situation with any decisions and kind of take my advice. So it's been great. And it all happened off of just something that I thought was going to be like a basic 2-week job.
Yeah, cracker. And with that, so because I find like one of the cool things about Bolt and Lovable is how quickly you can prototype something, right? So did you, because, and especially because like it's one thing to tell someone about this custom software that's going to do all these cool things, but if you can give them a working demo and show them, it's 10 times more powerful. Do you remember, did you charge him did you say, hey, look, like, 500, $1,000 or whatever, I'll build you a prototype of what this could look like in Bolt, and then kind of open the conversation up to a bigger deal? Or did you do that prototype kind of free of charge just to be like, hey, look, this is what's possible if you're interested, and that opened the door? Like, did you charge that little, we call it the prototyping phase whenever we build apps, but did you charge for that? Or was that something you kind of did just to play around to demo to him for free to then go ahead and kind of, I guess, upsell on a bigger platform?
Yeah, this is where the process is definitely changing because I did it for free. I was kind of I was viewing it as like a learning tool, kind of like we talked about learning over earning in that case. And I was under the assumption that I was going to use Bolt to start to finish create this thing. And so I built maybe 1 or 2 pages out of like a 10-page or 10 feature type of app that it is now. And I just showed them that it's possible. I showed like a couple transitions and whatnot. And then that's when I realized like the limitations of Bolt and how we needed to get into Cursor and how it was like just a lot more serious of a build. So now I don't think I would do exactly that. Maybe 1 page or 1 form or one kind of like micro feature. But back then I just built it on myself by like an afternoon. Super excited, showed them, and then kept delivering on Bolt. And then eventually it was like, hey, we need some more time and some more just kind of focus to get into using Cursor.
Yeah, nice. I think one of the, like, a lot of people focus on and another question just with that before we get into, like, this probably leads into what you've got here with development and automation and the services you sell. Do you see on average that like platform builds and the kind of solutions that you'd be building with like Bolt, Lovable, and those kind of tools tend to have a higher value than the automation builds like Make.com, Zapier, N8N connections with existing tools? Or what do you feel like your core offerings have been? Like, what are the main solutions that you've sold, and what looks like it's, I guess, more value and potentially easier, or what looks like it's maybe cheaper and maybe harder to do? Like, where do you see yourself kind of going into based on how much you've been selling these solutions for and how easy they are to do?
Yeah. So I didn't think that I was going to be doing custom coded AI platforms or anything like that. I thought it was going to be automation for a while. There was a couple big, people in the YouTube space that were just showing the bigger numbers. And I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And slowly but surely, these tools kind of started to rise, and then people would kind of have these whispers. And I just noticed kind of this movement in the market. One guy had this, like, he called it a micro tool where he just gave it as a part of his automations. He would charge for the automations, then he would build this micro tool with Bolt or Lovable, and then just kind of add it in as like a little special thing to increase the value for not much. And I thought to myself, like, why not charge for that thing specifically? And then as I was doing that, that's kind of actually when you popped up in my feed with your interview with Liam, and I started to kind of see how you were doing it, where it was like this internal CRM or internal core tool. And so I saw kind of both extremes, where it was like a small micro tool that, you just kind of add some value. And then like the main core offer of like, we're going to, revitalize your business and save you tons of money with this, all encompassing tool. And so I think I'm trying to hit that sweet spot in the middle where it's not exactly just like a 1-page tool, 1-page portal, which are nice, but they are kind of on the lower end of what you can charge. But, going all the way to a CRM is something that I've tried to avoid personally, just because I think it could be complicated for people that don't understand their business as much. So I've tried to find that space where I'm finding things that are basically apps or web apps or SaaS or things like that people have wanted to build either on a personal level or on a business level, and just kind of become that studio for them. So that's my focus now, more 70, 80%. But automation is the foundation of that in a lot of ways because you're still connecting APIs, you're still using a lot of the same logic, and you're still using things like, LLMs and whatnot. So a lot of times you kind of have to work with what people have if you're building a software on top of their business. And then if it's a completely, kind of side project or, extra business, then that's where you have a little bit more freedom. But that's the direction.
Yeah, cool. And I'm just looking at the list that you have here for like development and automation. And so I assume like you're willing to offer pretty much all of these services to a client, like if the price is right. And to me, it's just crazy that like in 2025, like if you wanted to offer these services even like 3 years ago, the levels in which like AI coding has evolved just in these last few years, like this is pretty much the entire, like a very large chunk of the tech space in here. You're building B2C platforms, SaaS platforms, internal tools, like landing pages. These used to have, you used to need like, if you wanted to build a top tier landing page, you needed a very good designer and then a dev to execute on those designs. And these used to take like entire teams to build. And it's pretty crazy that, I think it really comes down to execution these days and like that product owner mindset. But like someone that comes from, a relatively non-technical background can come in and sell these services for high ticket in 2025 using AI and kind of using that to learn and be able to do these things, especially with, no tech qualifications and stuff like that. So it's pretty insane how this is possible in 2025 when it really wouldn't have been anywhere near as easy just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, yeah. And I started off like online business with graphic design, and that was like Adobe Photoshop. But then I realized that there was a role such as UX. And so I tried to get in there, but it was still kind of like premature where you were just designing screens and handing them off to developers. So it was really like bifurcated in that way. It was really separated to where there was like a creative department and a technical department. And I never liked that because, as a designer, you were designing things that were just like not realistic. They wouldn't be done, but they were creative. And then on the technical side, these guys weren't thinking creatively. And so it was always this kind of friction. And then with how it is now, I just find that it kind of like, utilizes both sides of my brain, if you will. And it's really cool just to be able to go in there and use that graphic design / UX background a little bit, and then also have like the problem solving of code. I really enjoy the problem solving of code and like just the actual code itself, but also like the decisions behind it. Like, why are we using this screen or this action or this sort of thing? And how does that relate to the business outcomes? And so to me, like why I chose to go this direction versus like automation or other things is because of the capability of the tools and where they're at now. And also just the fact that I think it's like the biggest problem that I could work on right now. It's really exciting. It's really cool.
No, 100%. Cool. What I'll do, I'm going to quickly just change my Wi-Fi to the other one because it's faster, so it'll drop for like 20 seconds or so, and then we can move into the next slide, and that'll get edited. So 2 seconds. Cool. That should be back. All right. So, that's super interesting. Next up, like I can see you got the slide. So I want to learn a little bit more about how you even came to this space. Because I talk to all kinds of people. Like I've worked with people. I came from a construction background personally before I started doing these things. So no technical experience there. I've worked with like carpenters and trades people that have done this. There's high ticket sales people that have done this. Like it's really people from a lot of different backgrounds. So what even spurred you to want to go and do something like this? And how did how did freelancing and why did the AI space attract you? And how did you kind of get here in the first place from the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. So I did a lot of things like in the real world, just normal jobs, trying to see if I could find my place there. A lot of random internships. I went to college for 2 years for industrial design, but dropped out. Had a small internship in furniture design, even an internship in like fashion out here in Scottsdale. And then eventually I just realized that like it wasn't really going to scratch the itch of being my own boss. And I was working at a bookstore, and then I actually had one of the regulars that I was talking to ask if anyone that I knew Photoshop. And I did because of my graphic design background. And so he hired me, and I ended up working at a memorabilia auction where we have things like signed jerseys and stuff by athletes, even photos by celebrities. We even like bought and sold cars that were in the Fast and Furious franchise. So it was like really cool stuff, really interesting, and a lot of money. And even though I spent time there and realized that I probably could kind of take this to the top and make my own money, again, it wasn't really going to scratch the edge of having like the location freedom and just being able to do things like on my terms. So with that, I eventually just leaned into graphic design, tried to make something out of that. But I didn't like the revision process. I didn't like the fact that I felt like I wasn't delivering value. It was just kind of like a logo on top of a broken business or kind of like that. It just felt a little superficial to me. So I pivoted and moved into high ticket sales. And in high ticket sales, you kind of naturally, by osmosis, learn a lot of things about the sales process, the funnels, the marketing, operations, and things like that, which is like a whole education. I really love that part of it. And as I was doing that, did well there in 2024, sold just under 500,000 myself. And I just started to realize that I could do more with the knowledge that I was getting. And because I wanted that, more control, I eventually just decided to go out on my own. And then that's when I moved into automation. And so learn to make, and luckily, like over the past 10 years, I've collected all these different things of management, operations in the real world, and also in like the digital space. So that was where I could really speak with conviction, and then just start applying it to Upwork. And then, as we saw, just kind of start to take on small projects and build onto bigger ones.
Cool. And out of curiosity, what were you selling as a high ticket salesperson?
I sold a couple different offers. One of them was like a cold email infrastructure and management. One of them was video marketing for specific SaaS platforms where we would kind of make promotional videos for them. Other one was an Airbnb, operations, how to become an Airbnb person. And then the longest standing one was a coaching business where we were teaching people how to create their own home cleaning business, actually.
Cool. Okay. And because whenever I describe them, and from the most successful businesses that I've worked with, being very involved in like the startup space in the last 5 years, I've found that a lot of people say there's only two real things that matter in business. It's product and sales, or product and distribution. So you obviously got your distribution. Whatever you're selling has to get in front of the right people, and be sold in a way that people are going to use it. But you also need to sell, in most cases, a quality product that's going to withstand the test of time. So it's pretty cool that you can kind of take that. It looks like, from what I can see, is you kind of you got the sales skills and you built the practice there on how you can actually position an offer, whatever the case is, to sell. In that case it was high ticket sell, but now it's more so yourself and your own skills. And then you went across and actually learned the delivery side of things and the product and how to build there. And so I think the combination of those two things at the end of the day is probably what builds a successful freelancer, because those are the two things you're doing. You have to sell yourself and your skills, but you also have to actually handle the delivery side. So you're incentivized to actually worry about that. How can we optimize what we're doing here? How can we deliver better solutions to our clients? And how can we like constantly improve that? So yeah, and that's going to lead me into like the next part, which is, in terms of your sales and your offers and stuff like that. So using this experience, how do you go about actually selling? Like, what are you finding that's working? Which type of clients? Have you got an ICP or a ideal profile that you're looking to target? Exactly how on Upwork, how are you qualifying the jobs through that? Like, which jobs are you interested? How are you going about selling? Are you sending, is there some sort of proposal strategy that you use? And how do you handle that whole process of like using Upwork to find leads? How do you actually qualify them? How do you close them? And then what does that delivery process look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So sales, I've always considered to be like a master skill, just to kind of echo what you were saying there in the beginning. Like I specifically did as much sales as I could in different contexts. Like I've done a little bit of door to door. I've worked at a motorcycle dealership doing online phone sales. I've worked at, obviously said, like all these different offers, and even like at mall kiosks and stuff. So I definitely would recommend anyone, like if you just don't know what to do, but you know that you need skills, like sales is phenomenal in as many contexts as you can, face to face and also over the phone and over the internet, stuff like that. It's just best. But that being said, as far as like the selling process of this specific offer and this specific proposal or this specific business, it all comes down to Upwork proposals and just having the consistency with that, and then just moving through like very casually, basically scheduling the call, having the call, closing it, having a kickoff call, and then filling. But as you were saying, like one of the most important parts is like, which ones are you actually sending proposals to and why? For me, like I need to get the sense that someone knows that there's a technical gap. They can't be saying these minor comments. If you've seen this, you probably, you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, you know, should be a couple hours, or it's easy, you know, or I could do this if I had the time, or something like that. Any phrase like that to me is where someone is not admitting that there's enough gap. Any phrase where someone's kind of saying that, like, you know, I could do this, or it should take a couple hours and stuff, is just always a red flag for me. And so I try to ignore those. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And you can kind of like even also sense that on the call. Maybe it's not on the writing, but on the call, there's this real kind of like, you know, you need to perform for me kind of dynamic going on. And I just don't want to be a part of those. You know, that's the whole reason why I got into this space, just to kind of have, you know, my own decisions, my own qualifications. So I always avoid anything like that. I avoid anything that has like certain times or hours that they expect you to be available. I do not do like same day calls. I don't really like to join Slack. I don't like to, you know, be a part of, you know, stand-ups or anything like that. That to me is employment. And some of those are like, you know, very openly on Upwork. People are looking for employees, but sometimes people have something that they present as a contract, but they're still kind of treating you as an employee. So I always try to avoid those. And as far as like the sweet spot ones, it's the one where they kind of already in the writing are deferring to your expertise. They're saying, you know, we're open to Make, Zapier, N8N, or whatever you suggest. And then they're also talking about, you know, some extras. There is probably this one thing that they're specifically posting about, but they're saying, you know, we'd like to automate the rest of our business or other processes, and we're open to things like that. So those are the ones kind of where I was talking about earlier, where one simple job like on the CRM could turn into something on the operations side or the marketing side or things like that. And if you've been in this space, you probably do have these kind of like tertiary skills, whether that's like content generation, or you've played around with like, you know, Mid-Journey video or anything like that, just because you're in the space. It's nice to be able to offer those suggestions and someone's open to that. So that can be pretty clear in like the words themselves. And then if not, you just make sure that you bring it up during the sales call, and then you can really kind of make the best decision for yourself.
Yeah, cool. 100%. I want to ask you a couple more questions in a moment about like client red flags, because 100% like what, especially with AI these days, and like the social media, like everyone kind of making everything seem like it's a 2-second job when it's not. There's a portion of clients out there that just have really unrealistic expectations, and it's, you know, often it's worth just letting that one pass than trying to wrestle with their expectations and actually get something realistic. But in terms of like proposals, so when you scroll down Upwork's job feed, so you kind of mentioned like often some of the smaller jobs can actually be upsold into much bigger jobs. Like often the reason clients are on there in the first place, most of the time, is to find an expert. So like a lot of times they don't actually 100% know, they don't know what they don't know. And so sometimes they think they want something, but then an expert can come in and really upsell them on a much better solution if you can explain exactly why. So in terms of like filtering, a couple of things I just want to understand is, do you typically work with like local, you know, American businesses, or do you also work with businesses overseas? Like, do you have a preference there? Is one. And then in terms of like budget and statistics that Upwork shows you about a business, do you filter by hourly rate or job amount? Is that something that you do, or you kind of look through everything and like in your head, even a $500 project could be a $5,000, $10,000 project, so you'll still apply there? Are there any kind of like rules that you'll use generally when you're looking at job posts to apply to?
Yeah, definitely. So it is kind of this like value equation in my mind. I don't really have like hard set rules, but you know, the currency on Upwork is connects. Like every job requires a certain amount of connects, which is like the cost to pitch for it. And some of them are just, you know, kind of taken up to the top to, you're talking hundreds because of people really wanting that job. And so I always balance that with like the history of the individual, like the actual star rating, how long they've been on the platform. And then also the biggest one for me is probably going to be the average pay rate. There's always this thing where it says, you know, they pay on average $7 up to $70. And if it's on that lower end, you know, I just think that they're using Upwork for, what is it, overseas talent. And that's totally fine. It's just not, what I am. And so I always end up going for people that are a bit on the higher range. Even, 20 is good, but just something that's a bit more than like a couple bucks an hour, so that that they also actually pay for like professional services. And then sometimes I do go into the specific reviews as well and see the pay rates there and see like the amounts of the actual, total project. So if someone has paid someone, $20 an hour over 80 hours, then you're like, okay, this person's willing to do it. And it might not be exactly the rate that you're looking for, but as long as it shows some willingness to pay for bigger projects or extended projects, then I'm willing to kind of apply for that person. But if it's anything where it's like, $5 or anything less than that, I'm just not willing to do that. And it ends up that most people are in the United States or North America, at least. Sometimes I've had some clients in, England or Britain. And other than that, though, like the location doesn't matter too much to me. It just happens that the people that have those stats that I'm looking for that are also kind of lower on the end of connects, then makes sense that they're there.
Yeah, cool. I think like a large portion of the companies hiring on there are from the States. So if you're in that North American time zone, like you automatically have, a big client pool. Like a lot of those clients would 100% prefer to work with someone in the time zone and everything like that. So it's a really good benefit to be able to tap in and use, like that's your first competitive advantage off the bat, is you can kind of tap into that and use that as a sales point. In terms of like, okay, so you kind of scope out your correct client, and then what does your proposal structure look like? Are you using Loom videos in these proposals for every proposal? Sometimes like, what is it? Because I know from the client side, it's the first few sentences of that proposal that are shown when you submit that proposal in. So have you got like a specific structure that you typically write these proposals in using Loom videos? And then in terms of like an open rate, if you send 3 proposals per day, how many messages or interviews do you expect, like as a percentage roughly, to come back from the proposals that you're sending out on average?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as far as the structure, I do have like a template that I'll tweak, but it kind of hits all the points. Like the first sentence is always just, hi, I feel confident that I can do this, made a video, here's the Loom link. And then right underneath that, I get into like a one-liner about just my overall experience, and then bullet points on specific things that I've done. And if I can swap out bullet points that are more pertinent to their specific job, I'll do that. And then I just close with suggesting a call. And if there's other questions, you felt those questions. But for the most part, it's like copying, pasting that, kind of manipulating that a little bit, and then using my website there. And as far as like the volume with it, if I'm consistent and I do 3 Upwork proposals per day, I do get the notifications of people viewing my stuff. I'd say it's about maybe 30% of people that actually open the Looms. From there, you get another percentage of people that actually message you. And for the most part, if someone messages you, it does end up in a meeting. There are the off occasions where someone just completely ghosts even before the meeting. But the meeting, like I said, I want to get it within 3 days. So it's that same week. And with that process, it's probably been about an average of like 2 appointments per week if I'm staying consistent on that.
Yeah, cool. And do you feel like that's because obviously you have a top rated profile now, so your profile is in a higher percentage, but do you feel like that open rate, because one thing that I see a lot of people complain about is, especially at the start when you have $0 on your profile, it can take 10, 20, like it can take a lot of proposals, and the open rate is quite challenging. Have you seen that in general your open rates for your proposals have improved? Probably because your profile's gotten better, but maybe also because maybe your Loom videos and your actual proposal structure has also improved based on what you've seen is working. Have you kind of noticed that that's gotten better, or do you think that the proposal open rate and success rate was fairly similar when you first started as to what it is now?
No, it's definitely been a slow climb. Like in the beginning, it was sending out a few just to get, less responses on lower quality jobs. But you just needed that momentum. I knew that, luckily with Upwork, there is that reputation factor, which is actually a big, big benefit. Like you're not doing cold email, you're not doing advertising where you kind of have to, really prove your presence. It's just there on Upwork. So I was really willing to just do as many as it needed to get those first couple of jobs. And it did take a lot more. And, you just don't have that standing. Even my like bio and profile title and stuff was a bit more all over the place rather than as targeted as it is now. And it's gone to a place where, I'm applying, to a bit more qualified jobs just off of my own preferences. And also people are looking for people that have a certain, standing. And so luckily I do have that reputation. And so they are viewing a bit more. And then we're having more serious conversations for those higher tickets. So it's definitely been something that's grown. And, it can be a slog. It can be a slog. Like I've told you guys, like I spent a lot of time in sales. I was literally doing like 200 cold calls a day. And it's not comfortable. It's not fun when you're in those early stages. But it's just a matter of, like if you're in the gym, just doing the reps, and then just trying to forget, eat your food, have your sleep, do your reps, and then you'll grow bigger muscles. I think it's the same thing with business, and it can be rough. But once you get the momentum going your way, it feels super cool just walking around, living my life, and I see, another loom open, another Upwork message. And that's when it really starts to feel like momentum is shifted.
No, you've done it. You've done it very quickly. Like it's pretty crazy how quickly you've managed to do something like this. So the proposal gets opened, then usually you go back and forth with the client, and I'm assuming you try and get them on a meeting as soon as possible. What does that look like? But then on the meeting, like how do your meetings typically go, and what are some? I'm sure maybe now more so than back in the day when you first started, but I'm assuming now, like as you get busier, you have the luxury of being able to say no to people. Are there certain red flags that you look for from a client on a call? Are there certain things that a client could do that makes you think, nah, this isn't a job for me? Like, what are some green flags and red flags that you look for on those sales calls? And what's the objective? Coming off the call, are you trying to close financial investment as soon as possible? Or especially coming from a high ticket sales perspective, I'm assuming that momentum off the back of that call is super important. What does that sales call look like, and how do you structure that to learn as much about the client as possible? And also, what do the next steps look like to actually close the deal once you're off that initial discovery call?
Yeah. So obviously sales is like a deep, deep well. You can talk to this for a long time, but like SparkNote's version of it all is like get them on the call, on the calendar within 3 days, ideally. Never extend it to the next week. If you can, always try to get them as just fast as you can because the momentum is hot. And as far as like the call itself, I usually like to lead with a little bit of an introduction of just what I'd like to have happen on that call. Just go through the specific business processes that they mentioned on that thing. Also mention that, if there's other things that they want to bring up, happy to discuss those as well. And just let them know that I'm looking to see if I can actually help them. And then by the end of the call, they'll understand at least a basic idea of the types of automations that we need or the custom platform that we need and the features there. A little bit of the deadline as far as like time expectations. And then if it's something that's easily scoped on that call and you've done it before, or at least you're pretty confident you have, some working templates, or you have a basic grasp of what it is, then I do want to say a firm price and then let them kind of decide there. A lot of times with this, it's not about pushing them because, again, you are responsible for the fulfillment. In my past in high ticket sales, I would always push for like same day decisions and all that because, I wasn't responsible for the decisions or the fulfillment. And so that was just kind of like a different thing. But for this one, I really want to make sure that people do feel like comfortable and confident that they're going to get what they want. Because with automation and AI, we talked about the high expectations. And so I always kind of, underplay it, but do talk about the return on their business. And then if you hit that sweet spot, you can go for the close then and there. But other times, if it's not clearly scoped, either for you or for them, or that you just don't feel like you have this meeting of the minds, we'll give them a range perhaps and just ask, is that kind of what you were thinking? Are we in the same ballpark? And then they'll give me an answer. I'll kind of make that adjustment. And then from there, I move into writing. I've really started to emphasize this a lot more recently, where I'll make up a Google Doc that has all these things here on the bottom. Like, what am I actually going to be building? What does it do? What does it not do? Which is super important. What they're going to be responsible for as far as like accounts, charges, and then just actions that they need to take, prices and terms, and then like boundaries, what would be considered outside of the scope of this project. And with that, I've gotten a lot more professionalism, a lot more clarity with them and with me. It's just allowed for a lot better relationships just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And then once they agree to that, we accept terms, whether it's on that platform or others, and then we just move forward. So really the real key is like having that meeting of the minds. It's like classic business, right? Just making sure everyone knows what's expected. And then if you need to calm down expectations, calm them down a little bit. If you need to kind of boost up the ROI so they do get excited, then doing that.
Yes, sweet. So I guess if it's something that's kind of cookie cutter, you've done it before, you're pretty confident exactly how you do it, you can often kind of push for a close on the call and kind of start a contract right after that. Otherwise, and I think especially for larger projects, it's you've obviously got to kind of scope things out, and it's really important to have clear documentation on what this does do and what it doesn't do. Do you charge for that scoping process usually? So you kind of like, I guess you get to the end of the call and be like, you kind of talk them through what potential solutions could look like, but then maybe you suggest like, further scoping is necessary just to be 100% clear on exactly what's happening. Do you typically charge for that scoping process? Like, would you close the call and try and encourage some sort of Upwork contract creation as soon as possible, whether that's to deliver the entire project, or maybe that's just to do like a small milestone for scoping before you jump into something bigger? Is that something you typically do? Or do you sometimes do the scoping for free, and then like what does that kind of look like usually?
Yeah. So I think you and I approach this a little bit differently, because when I say scoping, I'm talking about just making sure like in written terms, something just kind of on paper being discussed what it's going to be. It's not exactly like building an automation or building a platform just yet, any sort of like MVP. I won't do that unless it's like a paid trial. I won't do any sort of like free work or any sort of, free trial. I think that's disrespectful on a certain level. But that being said, the scoping really is just like a 1 to 2 page Google Doc, just outlining what it's going to be and not going to be. It's not actually like technical work. So I'm happy to just spend, the 20 to 30 minutes with Claude, just telling, even giving them a recording of the call and the transcript and telling them, what do I need to do? What do they need to know about this? And then just making sure. And that's also something that I put a lot of emphasis on getting out as soon as possible. Ideally same day, ideally within a couple hours, so that they have that fresh in their mind. They don't have to go and, redo it the next day or anything like that. They can just look at it, make sure there is that meeting of the minds. And then once it's all good, then you move into the actual building. So I'm not actually like building anything as far as like files or coding or setting up a GitHub or anything just yet. It's just a document with terms.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so it's almost like an engagement summary. So it's kind of like probably summarizing a lot of what you talked on the meeting, where it's like, it could have like the next steps in that document, maybe a little bit about who yourself, like what potential solutions could look like, and then, propose next steps. Is that kind of the kind of stuff that you're putting in that document, just briefly?
Yeah, exactly. It's like an engagement proposal. It's not exactly like taking them through the process of making decisions on the files or the screens or the features or anything like that. That to me is like, kind of collaboration or potentially like an interactive audit. And yeah, I guess I call scoping more like that engagement proposal, not exactly that creative process, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then I guess the last thing with that whole kind of engagement on like, we've talked about like winning clients, proposal strategy, meeting calls, and then kind of creating the contract. What are some, like, you've obviously been doing this for a while now. What are some possible bad projects, experiences, maybe things that you've made, like what are some key mistakes that you've made, which you've come out the back of and be like, right, I'm not doing that again. And what are some things, like what are kind of some green flags and some projects and things you think you've done quite well, and you're like, yep, this is, I'm going to keep doing more of this. Whereas what are some like key mistakes you think you might have made and you're like, wow, I lost a lot of money there, or that was a lot of wasted time. And if I was doing this again, I definitely wouldn't do it that way again.
Yeah, it's definitely like the double-edged sword of being in such a emerging space where you do have the excitement. So people are willing to kind of go with the new projects, but there also is like that bubble phenomena where you have these terms like AI workflows or agentic and stuff like that. And I remember specifically, one gentleman was a business broker out in LA, and he told me, like, I want to make sure my business is agentic. And at the time I was just like, yeah, absolutely. We'll do exactly that. We'll make it agentic as hell. And it just ended up being something that, he did, everything went well as far as like terms and all that. He paid me and everything was good at the end, but there was a lot of conversation as far as like, well, this is not what I expected. And this is what I wanted. And I saw this demo video from OpenAI that says, they can do all these different things. And the thing is that like a lot of people are seeing these demos, these trailers, these, promotional videos from whatever type of software it is that just show the best of the best in these like isolated closed incidents. And so, and also, on my own end, I also believe some of that and I wanted to believe some of that. So I think what I learned from that was just making sure that all these buzzwords are just broken down into the actual deliverables. And you're not just saying, I'm going to automate your business or I'm going to, make your business agentic. That's just kind of asking for, non-boundaried scope. And so I've learned that I needed to just make sure specifically down to the actual files and what they are getting or not getting really, really needs to be discussed and figured out on both parties. And, in that case, I did get a decent amount of money for it and maybe it was the right move, but, I think I could have done it a little bit better.
Yeah. So you think, mate, the main thing there was maybe scoping? Because I agree. A lot of people come on these calls and do pull out, I think it's a typical sales thing where it's kind of like buzzword bingo. Everyone's throwing all these cool, fancy agentic's a great example, but there's all these words coming out, but it's like, what does that actually mean? Like, how are we going to build that? So would you say that it was kind of a scoping thing where, because a lot of these business owners are jumping on the call and they're saying those exact kind of things of like, I want to build an agentic system that uses AI and they have all these ideas about like cool things that it could be doing, but we really have to drag them back and be like, okay, exactly, like what data are we going to get in place to enable this? Like how are we actually going to do this step by step in human language without the buzzwords? So would you say that scoping has been something that you may have made some mistakes in terms of not scoping things out as much as you probably should have, or something further in the past, and that's something that you focus on more now? Or like, yeah, where would, in terms of time and money, I don't think anything's a waste in those stages because you end up just learning the hard way anyway when you do make those mistakes. But would you say like something like scoping or, would be a key thing that you've improved on this year with project experience and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is like the skill of business, the skill of running an agency, and like what ends up mattering more. The fulfillment itself is something that can be figured out, but the scoping process has just been huge. And the thing with that is like there's so many different softwares that it's kind of impossible to know all of them before any engagement, or else you're just not going to apply to anything. So I've always been like, well, I understand, the most popular project manager or the most popular CRM, but this client uses something that's a bit of an offshoot. Well, let me look up their API on Google and see if there's something there. But sometimes that has been an issue where, I saw that it had an API existed and the documentation for it, but a specific endpoint wasn't there. So we ended up in a situation where we had to pivot. So, with that, I don't think there's ever going to be a case where every software, every endpoint, anything like that. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think, though, that you do need to be professional about those types of restrictions, whether you know it on the front end or you want to just kind of like hedge your bet a little bit and just tell them, I'm going to look into it. It seems like that software has the API, but I need to confirm some things. And it's kind of a dance. It's kind of a balance because you don't want to give too much reason for them not to invest with you. But at the same time, like if you're doing your job well as a consultant, like there are going to be those conversations where you scope something out, but then you run into an issue. But because technology has shifted, now you need to pursue a different path. So that has been something I've gotten more comfortable with. I always felt like in the past, if I didn't deliver exactly what we talked about on the conversation, it was just blown up and I was going to get a bad review. But it has been something that luckily I've been able to figure out to where I'm at least able to suggest the next best solution. It may not have been, what was demoed from Sam Altman or anything like that. It's not, this thing where you don't have to touch a laptop, but it is something that at least, gets you, 50%, 80% of the way there and cuts down on time and saves you some money. So that as a whole, I think is, the art of business, the actual business work itself. And I think that's super, super important.
Yeah, it's funny that you say like that one of the typical issues is what you exactly described there, which is like being familiar with the space but not being familiar with this niche, a specific service that has an API. That exact issues actually happen to like myself and other people where it's like, look, this should be possible because all the other tools in the space can do it, but then you go into a specific case and you're like, it's actually not possible based on things that we can't control. And yeah, like you said, I think as you gain more experience, there's usually a way around it. It just requires some out of the box thinking. And it's like, okay, we might have to, it might not be as simple as A to B on what we initially thought, but I think as long as you put the effort in, you can usually architect some sort of solution to get the end outcome. It's just sometimes not as simple as you first expected. But that whole process in itself is a massive learning environment anyway, because you do that a couple of times and then you start to go, okay, and especially now with Claude Code and stuff, you can and like Exit MCP and all these cool new tools, you can like back in the day pre-AI, you had to go and manually read through all these API docs to like figure out what was and wasn't possible. And now, even on the scoping side, like if you're prompting Claude and you're using the correct MCPs and stuff correctly, a lot of that scoping risk can be researched a hell of a lot quicker, and you can ensure yourself way more than what these kind of things, like even scoping was if you're going to do that properly, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of hours for a big project. Like if you want to scope something properly and really protect yourself against what is and isn't possible, that requires a hell of a lot of experience and a hell of a lot of research. And these days, like you can scope pretty accurately in an hour or two of Claude prompting, which would equal 20 to 50 hours just 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been over my head a few times, but yeah, it worked out always.
Yeah, I think it as long as you have the mindset of like, all right, this isn't going to work, but and you're automatically going to solutions like, all right, how are we going to fix this? What's the next best way to do something like this? How can we change a process so that maybe we don't need this? I think as long as you have that mindset of like, all right, this didn't work, what's the next best solution? I think most of the times as well for me, like there is a way out of that tunnel if you look correctly. Cool. So I can see you've got a bunch of thoughts here. I want to talk about like if you were to give advice to someone who, because a lot of people, they want to do these kind of things. They want to get into Upwork. They want to start freelancing, especially in AI, because that's the hype word right now. And there's so many people out there that are throwing these buzzwords around and saying, oh yeah, make this amount of money by selling these automations, these voice AI agents, whatever the case is. And there's a lot of hype and a lot of FUD out there. If you were to give like just some tips to someone who is getting started on how you can actually succeed in this space based on what you've done, how would you explain this space, and how would you explain getting started and some of the things to do and maybe some of the things to avoid?
Yeah. So this space is huge. And when you say AI or you do AI or you have an AI agency, like it can mean so many different things. So I think that you have to really kind of zone in on stuff, but it takes a while. So as you're going through the process, first and foremost, like selling to the right people is going to be your biggest saving grace. If you sell to people that are going to be nitpicking you or have those red flags we were talking about, whether they're micromanaging or too budget focused or anything like that, it's just going to make your experience a lot worse. Like you do have to go through kind of some tough times when it comes to like technical problems or just cash flow problems or just kind of building a business in general. And you don't want to add on the experience of a bad client. So I put here, sell to the rich. And they don't have to necessarily be like super affluent, but at least people that aren't going to be, very concerned about, a couple extra days or a couple extra bucks if you need to extend the project or if it's outside of scope. I think that, I've had some experiences in the past where I try to make it work just to kind of, negotiate and feel like we both won, but eventually it just is not worth it. So sell to the rich if you can. These people value quality over just a couple extra bucks. So it's definitely going to be better for you. And the second point, conduct yourself professionally, but authentically, is just something that I've noticed that as long as you're being professional, like, the basics, like showing up on time, being as clear as you can, communicating, answering your emails, doing the looms that you need to do, you can have everything else the way you want to do it. Whether you're a night owl or a morning person, you can do it how you want to do it. Whether you design your website one way or another, et cetera, right? Make sure that you are doing this, for your freedom at the end of the day. But as long as you hit those professional points of, the basics, then you're good there. And we talk a lot about managing expectations. I think that's just an ongoing thing, even as the space is evolving going further. If you're any sort of consultants, you just always need to make sure that you're managing your own expectations as far as like what you can deliver and what timeframes, and also the client's expectations, whether it's in the beginning or in the middle or towards the end of the actual project and engagement. And then the last point, or second to last point, is integrate all your skills if you can. This was big on like my journey here because I had picked up little things here and there like graphic design, UX design, a little bit of coding, sales, marketing, operations. And this was a place where I felt like I could integrate everything and it could all be useful, from my own website to customers' websites and their own builds. And it just was a lot better to provide value, and also just to feel like everything that I've, spent my time grinding over was actually worth it in the end. I know some people, start off with something small, like I specifically started off with graphic design, and then you kind of maneuver there. And I think that's important. Like if you just can do anything to get your first online dollar, do it. Like my first online dollar was $60 for a logo, like so ridiculous. But it kind of went through, broke that ice, if you will, of being able to see that it was possible. And then from there, you focus in on integrating many more things if you can. And then last but not least is just knowing your value as a frontener in this technology. I think that we are still pretty early in this space. And then specifically, we're talking about AI coding and stuff. It's very, very new. I am still blown away of talking to people like on a day-to-day basis out at coffee shops or just out and about and stuff. And I tell them what I do, and they're either like completely ignorant if they're on the older side, and sometimes scared, or sometimes like panicked and all that stuff, or they say it's a bubble and stuff. And I bring up Claude and no one knows what that is. It's insane to me how early we are. And sometimes I don't want to believe it for myself, to not give myself that slack, but I think objectively there is a lot of the space to still be determined. And if you put yourself in the right spot right now, and you could be one of those voices in the future, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like people saying that like AI could be saturated, or like AI automation is saturated at this point. It's like, they're talking, and even me, like working with businesses are so far from truly adopting this technology like throughout their systems from the ground up. They're so far away from that still. And like I think the bigger the business, the more true that is. But a lot of the small to medium businesses haven't even really got their data in like aggregated correctly to start with, and they really can't implement AI properly until that's done from the get-go. So a lot of people that are thinking that like this space is saturated. I think there's a lot of hype marketing going out there, and there's probably a few bad actors out there that are building pretty crappy automations, which could damage business expectations of what's possible. But in terms of like, opportunity to drive real ROI for businesses with AI, we are still a long way off hitting, the sweet spot for that. So there is so much room left there. And then in terms of like, so you mentioned with getting started, it was like whatever you can do to get your first project. And that's one of the things that I typically talk about, because I think what a lot of people think, especially people that have been in careers for a period of time, is they expect to come from a career straight into, they don't want to take the hit at the start of a freelancing career to work for very little money to build the skills and the knowledge that's going to help you actually get your foot in the door in this space. So would you say, like for I typically refer to it as paid training, but would you say for like your first maybe 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 projects that, as long as you're getting some monetary value, it's really about skills and experience and getting, you kind of mentioned I forgot your exact wording, but like the feeling and the validation or the proof that like you can actually earn money through your skills on a freelancing platform or online like this and get paid for something without having to, not being in proper employment. Would you say that that's like a serious roadblock for most people, and that in that scenario, it should really just be about like hours is within reason is nowhere near as important, and it's more just about get some money in return for something you can offer. It doesn't really matter exactly what that is. Get your practice there, get comfortable with sales calls and handling clients on your own terms and stuff like that, and then go ahead and start executing and basically just improving from there. Like, how important do you think it is at the start? What's your recommendation for those very first like 1 to 3 projects for someone that's never really freelanced and handled these kind of engagements themselves before?
Yeah, I think it is a huge transition to go from like an employee mindset to an entrepreneur mindset, if you want to simplify things, whether it's freelancer, agency, or beyond. But I think that, personally, I spent a lot of time like in the employment world, kind of trying to play the game, trying to kind of do what my managers wanted, kind of play the operation, climb the ladder, do all that stuff. And you always kind of like, you always understand what it is to get to the next level on some level. And it's just up to you if you want to play it and how long you want to play it. But when you move into entrepreneurship or freelancing, it's a lot of like everything's self-dictated in some way. Even from the original $60 logo, like that was just a random number that I pulled out of my head. And today there's still like debate about pricing for all the services that we're talking about, like on the higher level. And that's with everything. That's with like whether or not you take calls during the week, whether or not you'll agree to Slack, whether or not you'll do all these different components that are in these engagements. And it just comes down to your preferences and also what the market values. So, you can't do exactly what you want, but you have to kind of meet in the middle. But going through that, I think it is, learn over earn in the beginning. You definitely want to take on the jobs that are there. You definitely want to take on the jobs that are available and, adapt yourself a little bit to what they're saying first, because you have to like learn what the market is saying. It's not like everything is going to be a clear, job posting where you can apply and it has, this much experience, this, and this. With Upwork, you do have that benefit, but once you move into like cold email or like advertising, you have to have a sense for what the market wants, and you don't get that if you don't start somewhere. So I'm big on doing that, and then eventually you will have the transition of being like, okay, certain things are just kind of below my level or not of my interest, and it's just not going to be worthwhile. But in the beginning, it's always going to be like learn over earn. You got to pay your dues, if you will, and that's not to say take longer to succeed or anything like that. If you find bigger ticket jobs and you can close them and you can deliver them, do it. But in the beginning, if you're getting hung up on something not being 4 digits and it's a couple $100, I think that's the wrong approach. I think you should really just try to get some momentum, get it going, and then go through the entire process. And if you have a job, it's great, do it on the side. And if you're doing it to, kind of mashing together a couple different jobs, like I kind of did with high ticket sales and then this, then you just have to, realize how much you're willing to put into it and then put into it. And it's cost a lot of late nights. It's cost a lot of headaches and like hair pulling moments. And eventually, though, you do, find your way through, and so you'll get there.
Yeah, I think, like, to me, it seems it's a classic with anything, but a lot of people that are doing well in the space are simply talking about, promising, like, you can get rich really quickly, the typical sales techniques, and what I think a lot of people is just getting miscommunicated is like with anything. Again, the first stage it's learn before you earn. You can't run, like if Elon Musk gave you his business portfolio tomorrow, you just drop it and crash that entire thing because you haven't got the experience and the knowledge and all of the valuable skills that you learned doing the late nights that you mentioned to actually understand how to even operate something like that. And so I think a lot of people think that they can just jump straight out of something and just jump straight into earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in AI. 100%, all those things are possible, but there's a lot of there's a lot of skills and knowledge that you need to acquire to understand how to operate something like that. And this freelancing stage of doing, 1 to 5 projects at the start, focusing on, you can treat it as like a much more of a learning environment, is going to help you build those key skills. So when you go and start to win bigger clients, manage bigger projects, you're going to be a lot more confident. You're going to understand how to actually manage an environment like that.
100%.
Cool. So getting close to the end, but I want to kind of talk about what you think. Like I can see this cool funnel that you have with AI automation and AI SaaS. I want to talk a little bit about like what you see here and where you see the future of, like if you were to get into something in 2026, or even your vision of what you think your product offering is going to be in 2026, what does that kind of look like for you?
Yeah, so the funnel on the left has kind of been like my own personal path through this, starting off with AI as a whole, just learning, Claude, ChatGPT, moving into automation with like Make or N8N, and then specifically now I'm focusing more on AI SaaS. And SaaS has been around for a long time, obviously so, but like the means of production for it have been just a lot more democratized. It's been to where someone like myself who doesn't have a coding background but has like a business background can use that and still create these digital products or these infrastructures, if you will. And so I'm excited by that. Like I said, it uses a lot of the skills that I built up over the years. And so that's where I want to go specifically. And a lot of these things like Lovable and Bolt say that that's going to come down to, everyone being able to do such a thing and post apps to the App Store. But it's still going to be the same thing as far as like businesses, on a B2B level. Businesses are still going to want professionals or agencies to go and build those things for them. Even if these tools do exist, they don't have the time or kind of the budget or the wherewithal to understand, what the pitfalls are and stuff like that. So I'm focusing on delivering AI SaaS on a B2B level, and eventually doing some stuff that's more, me to the market, whether it's like for B2B purposes or B2C purposes, but me just launching my own apps and doing some stuff like that. That's not something that I want to let myself get distracted by just yet. I do want to have a couple more reps with a B2B level, kind of building something for someone as a technician and kind of a leader there. And then through that, I'll learn the gaps, I'll learn what I need to know. And then if I have the time and kind of the funds for it, then I can launch my own stuff. But as far as 2026 goes, I'm going to continue to just lean into Cursor. They continue to have cool updates and they just make it a lot easier for you to just, produce interesting stuff on a good timeline. And, the excitement of that hopefully is going to lead some people to try it, realize that it's a lot, and then they'll come to people like myself to finish it or just kind of bring their ideas into fruition.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it is like especially Cursor, even like just looking at, that IDE and people see like the files and stuff like that and terminals and stuff, and it looks very overwhelming for someone that's non-technical. And I think even with, there's also like everyone knows how to post something on social media, but that doesn't mean that we're not hiring marketing agencies and social media agencies who are experts in that space to get things done. And I think it's a similar thing in this AI space, that the technical skills are being less and less prioritized, and it's more so that that product mindset that is becoming more prevalent. But that doesn't mean that, I don't think that means that the AI space is going to be done by business owners anytime soon, because they've got so many other things on their plate to worry about. One little thing you mentioned, do you feel like so you mentioned you obviously come from a business background, but do you feel like you're much more technically literate just based on getting into tools like Cursor and using that? Like, do you feel like your technical understanding and skills has naturally grown a lot, or what does that journey feel like for you in comparison to where it was, this time last year?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I could think logically, I can think like on a systems level, but I didn't have any sort of like context or language for even like JSON files. I didn't know what JSON files were. I didn't know what an HTTP request was. And I didn't know anything about, the structures of a SRC file and all this stuff. And I still half the time don't know on a technical level, but I understand the logic beneath it. And so sometimes I'm having conversations with Claude or Cursor where I'm like explain this to me in a metaphor. And then I kind of get the concept, and then it kind of allows me to make decisions. And so to me, it's a much more about like decision making behind the code. And I feel like I have a team of technical people underneath me that I can just kind of guide. You don't have to be the best technical expert to build these sort of things, but you do have to understand the logic and like the concepts beneath it. And you can use these tools, luckily, to give that to you in a language that you understand. But by osmosis, I have learned more about, what is capable on a technical level, and also, different stacks and stuff. And that's one of the questions that people ask me, like, what's your tech stack? And I'm like, it doesn't, it's Cursor, it's Claude. Does it really matter? Like, do I make something that's useful is the more important question to me. And, the other stuff will kind of figure itself out. If it's React, I'll go learn React. If it's Java, I'll go learn Java. To me, it's just like, are you resourceful? Do you know how to ask the right questions? And can you make good decisions? And that's what's gonna really matter, because, this is the capability of, this is what these tools are designed for, to make it easy for people to go and do things, even though you don't know, the specific dot, dash, comma, colon, you need to do it. Just, can you make good decisions?
Mm. Yeah, 100%. And so with Cursor, have you played with any frameworks or anything in there? Like, so you are using Claude Code in Cursor, or are you using, Cursor's chat with the model access? And have you played with like any AI coding frameworks at all, or are you still just using kind of Cursor's chat to build things in there?
So by frameworks, do you mean like the BMod and stuff like that?
Stuff like that, yeah. There's like SpecKit and OpenSpec, and there's a few little frameworks that are kind of out there to kind of put some guardrails on like AI coding in general, and then build a bit of structure. Have you kind of played with those things, or you just felt like you haven't needed them to this point?
Yes and no. So one thing I did when I was like trying to educate myself was take a project management course on Coursera that was offered by Google. And they go over things like Six Sigma and those different like project management principles or I guess they're called frameworks. And that made a lot of sense to me. It kind of like it explained the different roles in a product design or product management kind of company, and that helped as far as like knowing the different components that go into it. I don't use BMAT. I have tried BMAT, but overall, I'm just kind of relying on either the planning method or the asking method or the things that I've absorbed through my time with either those education sources or just like my time in business. And then I'll just kind of make the decisions from the role itself. So I know in BMAT, there's a couple different roles. One of them is like a designer, one of them is like a business and stuff. And so I'll just have one chat that I'm specifically making, design decisions. And then I'll move to another chat that has a whole separate context for making business decisions. I'm not exactly giving it like a framework of what it should expect or how it needs to talk to me and stuff like that. Maybe that's something that I'll explore. But for right now, as long as I separate chats, I give it enough context to know what problem we're discussing, and it seems to be working out all right.
Yeah, sweet. I think me personally, like I'm super interested in that whole kind of AI coding space and like how can we like these different models, like which models work best for different things, and how can we set up like the correct structure and stuff to because I'm obviously like deep in the software space and software development stuff. In terms of I like this funnel chart here because, to be honest, when I talk to people about like, because a lot of people, even especially people that aren't aware of what a HTTP request is and what JSON is and all that kind of stuff, like talking about getting into make.com and N8N can just be like a massive step. And so in terms of like, I think it is about, again, you talked about like the 30%, challenge, like 30% unknown, 70% known. And so to jump straight into Cursor, for example, it's like, for most people that are non-technical, that's 80-90% unknown territory.
Yeah.
So, but I like the kind of funnel here. So like, would you say, if you were to tell someone who was like a random person down at the coffee shop who is completely non-technical, and they wanted to be someone that builds apps in Cursor in a year from now, what would you say, like, go learn this, feel comfortable, then go learn this? Like, what would you say the path to doing that would look like if you had to explain it to, someone down at the coffee shop who was completely non-technical?
Yeah. If someone asked me like, how do we get to doing that? I think it'd be both. I think it'd be both something like Make, where you're doing, connections and nodes and mostly JSON files. And then also like the Lovables and the Bolts or the Base 44s of the world. And if you can do a couple things with those two together, where, you're sending webhooks from your app to N8N and then you're going through that process, then you'll have a complete understanding of like all that's required. Now, you may not use those tools like the same way. You may find a way to integrate an API key into the actual app itself or the code itself. So you won't need those nodes, but just doing it that way, I think, is the simplest to like visually see it. Specifically on like the Make side or the N8N side, you can actually see what's going on and see the individual payloads and understand that and understand the flow. And then also like on the coding side, like a lot of it is just like hieroglyphics. So if you go in there, and you can't have either extreme, I think. I don't think you can be like only prompt engineering and expect that to work well. And then also, I don't think you need to really dive in to learn every single language that's required to build an app. You have to kind of go back and forth between, okay, what's going on in the code and what prompt made that happen and what's the logic here, et cetera, et cetera. So whether it's Bolt or Lovable, you can look at the code and then try to make some changes, like, make some changes to a title or something just to see how it updates and stuff like that. Kind of the more basic UI elements, but maybe leave the logic to the prompting. But as long as you know what's going on and you're curious enough to ask the question of why, asking the LLM, like, why did you make this decision or why did you go about this build this way, then you'll get enough answers to know what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. And even with like on Lovable and stuff, you can put it in chat mode where it doesn't actually edit any of the code. So you can start to ask it questions about, okay, what is this? Why did you do this here? Can you explain this folder? Those kind of things. So you can start to kind of piece the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think, a lot of people like ChatGPT and Claude and a knowledge of like basic LLMs on, the website is like kind of step one. So you understand how like to actually talk to an AI model and expect, what's coming back. And then I think Lovable and Bolt are like a very clear next level, because again, they're abstracting a lot of like the complexity that you're going to see in Cursor. They're kind of hiding a lot of that in a nice interface. But then in doing that, you can kind of get an understanding of like, because Lovable's just released that you can actually see your data tables and stuff. Like you used to have to go to Superbase to view your tables and stuff like that. They've kind of released it all in-house now. So in Lovable, you can get an understanding of your data tables and stuff like that. You can start to piece together the whole infrastructure of like what an app looks like. And then, yeah, it's really like, I don't know, for me, it looks like a step-by-step progression where it's like, get comfortable with using just AI in Claude first. You know what I mean? Like building some little custom GPTs, whatever. Then when you want to build a more complex app, like hop into Lovable or Bolt. If you want to build some workflows to plug into there, you can connect to make Enid and Zapier, and like, and then, you know, once you played with that heaps and you're familiar with like making those connections, then it's kind of like level 3 is Cursor, and which is a bit more complicated, but it's a bit of a step-by-step thing.
Yeah, like bare minimum, like today, download Claude and start talking to it. Like people are asking me like, what would you do? Like, what is AI? How do you get into it? Like, just start talking to it and like push it. Like, use it as Google first and foremost to like just search up your random thoughts or your queries, but then start to push it. Be like, make me a table or make me a graphic or make me a visually interactive calculator. And then you'll realize like, oh my God, like this is in the palm of my hands. And then from there, just kind of go up that ladder, as you said, and just, you know, as long as you're curious and it does actually kind of speak to you and it feels like something you can make money on, I think that's super motivating. And, you know, back to the original point of like, you know, taking on projects that are a little bit outside of you too, like money is the motivator. So if you do have a client that's expecting you to learn something, like even though it's frustrating and even though it's scary and even though, you know, you'll have to download this next thing that's kind of on that next rung up the ladder, if you have money waiting for you to do it, like you're going to stay up. That's how I did it.
Yeah. Yeah, and even the knowledge of like, even if it's a $50 project now, because it's my first project, like, this is my first project. You know what I mean? Like that's even 50. Like keeping in mind, like $50 for the first project. That I whenever I explain it, like I actually think those first 1 or 2 projects are the hardest of your entire journey. Like all the way up until making, you know, 6 figures in these kind of things. I think there's obviously a lot you still need to get right after that phase, but like the vast majority of people don't get past there. So it's like if you even get $50 for one project, like you've just jumped over 50% of people there. So
absolutely,
yeah, that's huge. Mate, I'm super appreciate it. It's been super interesting, kind of like bouncing those ideas back and forth and learning a bit more about how you got here and where you see this space of AI going. If someone wanted to work with you or engage with you or something like that, what would you say? Like, where's the best spot for them to reach you, connect with you, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so my website's probably the best one. It's cleancutsystems.com. I'll give you the link for that. And then I also have a school community called Vibe Code Cowboys. I'm kind of building out slowly but surely if you're more interested in like the app side of things. And then I have a YouTube channel by the same name, Vibe Code Cowboys, that just kind of shows a couple different things on everything we've talked about, from the business side to the technical stuff to how you go about just navigating the space and whatnot.
Sweet. I'll link all of those down there. Mate, really appreciate the chat, and yeah, it's obviously good to like get in and just have this. I know we've been talking a bunch, but get in and have this conversation and learn a bit more about where you're going. Because yeah, this AI opportunity, you know, there's a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of gold in here for the people that are like actually putting the work in and learning how these tools work and how they can actually generate ROI for businesses. And I think, you know, it's pretty obvious that the people that are actually willing to learn these things and put the effort in, and struggle with the outbound and everything that we talked about today, pretty much, none of that's going to come easy. Even for people, you know, that have high ticket sales experience and people that have got a lot of relevant experience, it's still a real journey. So I think as long as you know, I with most people that I talk to in this space that have that mentality of, as long as you have the mentality of being willing to learn, being willing to jump in there and solve solutions, like at the end of the day, as long as you just keep cracking at it, you're gonna figure it out.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I know we've been chatting and stuff, and I've been kind of giving you the insight on how things have been working or not working. And it really just comes down to like the action takers. I've heard it from somewhere else, or I forgot where, so few people in the space are actually just taking action and doing it, and, overcomplicating and overanalyzing it. And if you just, put in the work, put in the reps, and eventually, trust in yourself, then it's a really exciting place. I'm super happy to be where I'm at. Very excited for the next year, and just kind of like earn myself that freedom and earn myself, hopefully, the authority in this space as time goes on, and just for cooler and bigger projects.
Mate, keep killing it. That is great to hear.